The government's response to the Trojan Horse affair in Birmingham schools is in part to introduce new guidelines for independent schools, free schools and academies in England, which, in the words of the new Education Secretary Nicky Morgan, will make sure that they actively promote fundamental British values, including respect for the rule of law and tolerance. But one pressure group, the Christian Institute, is threatening a legal challenge to the government's plans because it says that far from promoting one fundamental British value, free speech, the guidelines will inhibit it. Colin Hart is director of the Institute and joins us from Brighton. We're also joined by Gaffer Hussain, who's managing director of the Quilliam Foundation, which is well known for campaigning against radicalisation in the Muslim community. Colin Hart, what's your beef?
Well, my concern is that currently, if you want to disagree with a school, the way it teaches history, maths or whatever it is, you can't sue a school on discrimination laws over the content of the curriculum. But under these plans, you will be able to sue an independent school, a free school or an academy over the content of the curriculum. So if you think your history lessons weren't sufficiently pro-Catholic or anti-Protestant or whatever it is, you can sue the school. And it's a sort of super equality law that doesn't currently apply to any school.
Well, is it you say it's a law, there are guidelines, aren't they?
No, it's going to be introduced by regulations, and the government's going to inspect
secondary
schools.
Legislation, yeah.
Yes, and they will be inspected according to those rules. It's going to be a summer consultation. One major part of it is already over. It was only 6 weeks. Under the regulations, parents are explicitly sidelined in their views, and it really threatens to undermine the ethos of independent schools.
Well,
many of them...
let me just take a bit here. I know this is a part that you object to. The new requirement, this is the quote from the guidelines, new requirement for schools to actively promote principles that encourage respect for persons with protected characteristics, as set out in the Equality Act of 2010, is intended to allow the Secretary of State to take regulatory action in various situations. For example, where girls are disadvantaged on the grounds of their gender, failure to address homophobia, or where prejudice against those of other faiths is encouraged or not adequately challenged by the school. Now, what problem do you see arising from that?
I don't see a problem with respecting pupils, whatever their background. I do see a very big problem with requiring schools to actively promote these government values. And even under the government plans, parents are to be challenged if they disagree with the new government rules on equality.
Well, let me bring Gaffer Hussain in at this point, because you're very interested through the Quilliam Foundation in the whole question of people of different backgrounds, different faiths, different traditions, living and working together. Now, what do you make of Colin Hart's concerns here?
I really don't understand his concerns at all, to be honest with you. I mean, I looked at the section that is put under discussion today, and it says, for example, schools must actively promote specified principles including furthering tolerance and harmony between different cultural traditions and encouraging respect for democracy. I mean, British values are sufficiently vague and sufficiently open and sufficiently focused on things that most of us can agree on, like the rule of law, democracy, respect from different backgrounds and different cultures.
No, absolutely. Even if we all accept that, the difficulty is that if you've got vague definitions and then you bring the law in, it's precisely because they're vague that there's a real problem if you start to give people the opportunity to challenge them legally.
No, I think they're vague, but at the same time, I think we know when individuals are encouraging exclusivist or isolationist mindsets or encouraging hatred towards certain groups in society, that they're going against these values.
Well, is it easy to judge that legally? I mean, different people would have different views, wouldn't they?
It's not always easy to judge that legally, but I think the key point here is we should not allow people to use religion as an excuse to encourage antipathy towards mainstream society or the values that we as a mainstream society should be encouraging.
Right, let me bring Colin Hart in on that specific point.
Well, I don't think we're going to disagree on that, but I think the problem is the way these things can be used, and it can be completely over the top. I mean, promoting transgender rights is not going to combat Muslim extremism. What it is going to do is going to create its own form of extremism, which in some cases is going to undermine the ethos of the schools. The government talks about taking pupils round places of worship of different faiths. Well, why should a Jewish Orthodox school be required to take pupils around a church or a mosque? That's up to them, isn't it? Why should the government use the law to bounce schools into doing that? That undermines their ethos.
Gaffer Hussain.
No, I think, look, it's very important that schools are judged on their ability to produce rounded individuals who are ready for mainstream society, who are prepared to interact with people from a wide variety of backgrounds. And I would want my kids to go to a school where they're going to learn about other faiths, learn about the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, the Sikh tradition, go to places of worship and be ready to interact with a wide variety of people in the real world, rather than only mix people from a very specific background. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I'm not sure schools are going to be forced to take their kids to every single place of worship.
Well, that's right. Just reading the section in question, Colin Hart, it says, for example, putting up posters on a notice board and organising an occasional visit to a place of worship would fall short of actively promoting. In other words, the government wants schools to think about how they can introduce people to the backgrounds that other pupils have. But it doesn't say, for example, the example that you raised, that kids in a Jewish school should be forced to visit a church. It doesn't say that at all.
No, but it says if you did do that, it wouldn't be enough. So the question is, what do you have to do? And why should a Jewish school be forced to take kids to a church? Yes, no problem with learning about other faiths, but why should you make schools with a religious ethos comply in that way? And the danger is we're taking specific things that arose in Birmingham and applying a blanket solution of political correctness, which is going to be very damaging to British education.
Colin Hart from the Christian Institute and Gaffer Hussain from the Quilliam Foundation. Thank you both.